Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to another of our Sociology of Media Voices series. And today we're doing a deep dive into everything to do with link community transport, governance, and why it's important to look at built structures, especially for our vulnerable communities. And we're very fortunate today. We've got Dr. Danny Davis, who has joined us. He is the Managing Director of Link Community and Transport. He has over 30 years experience as a successful entrepreneur in his own firms and as an executive mentor and innovation coach in commercial, government, and non-profit organizations. Dr. Danny specializes in the effective business applications of technology, digital disruption, so I'm very excited about knowing about that, business innovations and strategic agility in mature stage Australian organisations. He helps small organisations mature and develop their practices. Danny holds a PhD in governance, serves as Australian representative on international standards for development for corporate governance, IT, cybersecurity, AI, which we know, artificial intelligence and innovation, and as a visiting fellow at the UTS Institute of Public Policy and Governance. Wow, all that.
I'm exhausted already.
Welcome, Dr. Danny Davis. Welcome to this space. So let's start. What got you into this space? Because it's incredible, your insight.
Look, that's a good question. Look, I got involved in this really through my interest in governance, and wanted to serve on a board where I could contribute both from the kind of operational, effective, as well as the sectoral change disruption kind of point of view, as well as the governance side of it and where those mechanics join. That's kind of my particular area of passion, is ultimately making effective organizations. What is an effective organization? And particularly when you're looking at the community sector, you're talking about both financial and non-financial value. But look, that's true of all organizations. All organizations have a purpose that is beyond the purely financial, and to be able to call out and be specific about the social values, the non-financial value, the community value. What is the purpose and existence of this organization? Why do we get up in the morning? Why do we care? Why should we be here? What right do we have to exist? Is a fascinating place to start. To be able to flow that through to the governance of, so are we doing it? We're good at counting the dollars. Are we doing any of the rest of what we think we're here for? We come into this with great hearts and great aspirations and goodwill, and even the most rapacious commercial organizations are full of people with goodwill and good intention. So are you doing it? And it fits in with my PhD background, which was about looking at organizations and how they work with the new ESG, environmental, social and governance rules, with the new forms of corporate reporting, investors' view of the world. And really there's a continuum between the corporate, the not-for-profit and the community sector, and indeed government, and how you actually see across an entire sector for well-being and societal well-being, made up of the active participation of many organizations of different types. It's a fun area.
It sure is. One of the things that, for people maybe new into this space, what is governance? And let's just unpack that, and then I want to go into what makes good governance. Because so many of us, later in my life, I'm involved in many spaces and setups of new orgs, but we don't really, we hear the word governance, but we don't really know what it is.
Absolutely.
So there we've got the doctor in front of us.
They are two of the most complex questions that you could possibly ask. What is governance and how does it work? I mean, literally being in the international standards development meetings, and those questions get asked, and there are furious and passionate discussions and arguments about what that actually means. Look, for me, governance is really just about, do you have adequate and appropriate controls for the organization to ensure that it is doing what it should be doing and that it isn't doing what it shouldn't be doing? Now, that applies very differently if you're looking at a startup organization, if you're looking at a small or medium not-for-profit, if you're looking at government and its responsibility across all of society. And governance really is, the ultimate set of kind of frameworks and controls that allow you to assure that you are actively engaged in the right things. I talk about the concept of being able to ask, if we did everything we were currently working on today, who would we be as an organization? Not what would we be doing, how many widgets would we be selling, how much would we have in the bank? Who would we be? And you seem to have got me on a more philosophical day, but you look at the essence of an organization as an artificial person, which is actually what a company is. It is an artificial person. Why does it exist? What is its purpose? What are its ethics? What is it here to do? And have you got adequate systems to see whether you as an organization are fulfilling your purpose? That is where governance lies. I talk about the concept, I take it a little bit further, and I talk about future effective organizations. It's not just about what you are, but it's where you are striving to become, what you're working on. I talk about the concept. I think people are familiar with the concept of fiduciary duty, which is a board's responsibility for the money, basically, making sure that the money isn't leaking out of the organization into people's pockets. I talk about the concept of future fiduciary, which is, can a board assure, not just hope for the best, but assure that the organization is optimally invested in its own future? Is it putting its time, its efforts, and resources into making the best possible future for itself and its constituents, the stakeholders, the people it is there to provide value to? Is it doing everything it should be, or is it doing something else? And a lot of organizations are very busy doing something else, doing things that they used to be doing things they think they should be doing things that were put in place 20 years ago. Really, not a lot of that is contributing to them being the best organization they can be into the future and providing the greatest societal value into the future.
When we're looking at governance, and something that I've become familiar with is the importance of training, because so many people want to put their hands up and say, oh yes, I want to be on a board, I want to contribute and change the world and make change. But something that I'm learning quite quickly is that there's a lot of responsibility in the ethics. What is your view about the current training that we have in Australia for people who are on boards? And can I ask you, why is it not yet compulsory for people to do the training, to be registered?
Oh, there's a bunch of questions. You're asking some really good and nitty questions in here. Look, I think that training is a mixed bag. Look, much of the training comes from Australian Institute of Company Directors. The materials they do are of a fairly high quality, but I think, and this is my view, horribly incomplete. I think they are very focused on the kind of legal and structural side and much less on the purposeful and value and ethics side. And look, that's kind of a traditional place. Why is it not compulsory? I could be horribly cynical here, and I probably will be. You caught me on an interesting day. the AICD is very interested in getting their particular brand of training to be a compulsory requirement, just like CPA or various other professional associations have managed to embed their training into regulation. I personally, and I could be in trouble for this, think that that is actually a bit of a corruption. I think it has slanted AICD and some other organisations who are trying the same thing to become overly focused on their specific branding of their training. And I would prefer to see some of these professional associations be a little bit more like it was in the old school, where there was much more of a tradition of handing down of experience from one to the other, whereas a place where, you know, emeritus professionals could go to give to the next generation. I think training materials are important. I endorse them. I think they're good, but I think they tend to miss the wisdom.
Mm.
And there is a lot in this space that I think can come from wisdom, and that comes from the individual. And I think there are a number of associations whose overemphasis on the structure and formation of repeatable training has left some of the wisdom out of the room. And I think we need it more now than ever. And it's not just wisdom, but I think it's actually, it's the wisdom of experience to teach how to engage with some of the challenges of the future. You know, I think we're facing an environment where the future challenges are much more present and real and solid than they have been. And I think organisations of all ilks really need to be grappling with some of these purposeful issues. You know, look, you've really got me on an interesting day. The society we can create by all organisations actually striving to reach their potential, and the potential of the purpose for which they exist, just as all of us as individuals should. If we're in a society where each individual person is free and has the you know, equity of support and access and grounding and opportunity, is a much better society than one that is entirely followed by rules.
Mm.
So, while I think the rules are important, they are not the only game in town.
And before we move right into your work in your present CEO role, one thing that I have always been asked, and something that's burning inside of me, that I wanted to have to ask you this question. When you are on the board, do you need to, is it better to have a distant relationship with the people on that board? Or is it okay to become friends?
I think it's important to become friends. Look, the board is a team like any other team. I think that it needs to be an effective and cohesive force where people can have the safety to bring up difficult questions. I think that sticking entirely to the status quo is possibly, as far as dangerous for a board, it is certainly going to diminish the value of a board. I think if a board purely is responsive purely to the materials that are put in front of it and doesn't actually think outside of the box and look beyond and provide, you know, it should be, and there are many constitutions of boards, many different engagements that a board can have with an organisation, and each organisation has different structure and purpose and a different point of maturity in their life cycle, where a board can add different types of value. But if a board is purely responding to the paper in front of it and providing independent oversight of a set of rules, That is a valuable thing, but as I said before, it is not the only purpose. Now, not all boards, not all organizations need a board that is stretching its thinking and logic, but many do. And for those who choose to be purposefully valuable and who choose to be leaders, then I think the board has a capacity, has a role to play in helping that thought leadership. If the board is a place where people feel comfortable and amongst friends to put some of those ideas out there and or shoot them down if they're stupid, but it is a free and creative environment, I think that is a real positive. That can obviously, there's all sorts of friendships and all sorts of groups and different roles that people will take within it. But I think, strong camaraderie and trust is fundamental, and is more often better than not. There's no magic answer to this stuff.
No. And the other one I want to ask you was, in your experience, in your research, those boards that have one designated chair, as opposed to having more than one or co-chairs, is there one that you see more effective over the other, or is it a bit of, well, works in some cases and doesn't?
Look, again, you're asking some really good questions here, and there are more different ways of doing this than you can point a stick at, and it comes down to the personalities of the people involved. You get very good chair people, you get people who are not so good, you get people who are good at drawing out the creativity and opinions, who are good at covering the necessary and compliant subject matter and the oversight stuff, but then drawing people on broader questions, and you get ones who are terrible at it. Cycling is not necessarily the answer to the problem. Again, I think back to the coaching and mentoring and wisdom, and what I would really like to see out of a professional association is a forum where people can, sit at the knees of the elders and the experience and go, ooh, yes, I could bring that into what I do. I can learn, I can experience. I think it is a skill. I think it is an art form. I think it is something that people can learn and mature towards, and can definitely should not have to learn on their own. As I said, I don't think cycling is necessarily the answer, certainly by itself. There's some fascinating research. One of the most enjoyable papers I read through my PhD was on somebody who had simply done a satisfaction survey of board members, and the extent to which people felt that they could think, communicate, be creative, contribute ideas. And it basically showed there was a really quite frighteningly low general feel for the ability of board members to contribute within a board. But that level of satisfaction in the way that meetings will run and the one's ability to contribute one's own value, generally low, much higher for the CEO, higher still for the chair. Chair was pretty happy with how things were going, could contribute value and contribute all the value they had to bring, others less so. And that was statistically significant, let's just say that.
Okay.
Yeah, look, there's many boards and there's effective ones and there's also less effective ones. And there is no right answer, but you want it to be a place where people can bring their experience and the value of their knowledge, and frequently they're very limited and focused on too much of the day-to-day.
And now, with all your expertise and knowledge of your research, you're the current CEO of Link and Community Transport. So let's sort of unpack, what is Link and Community Transport?
So look, Link has been around for about 40 years. It was originally set up by a couple of mums with disabled kids who couldn't get them out and about, and decided to set up a service to do it. And it's grown from there. Look, the board had the understanding that the organisation had enormous potential to make significant impact on, as we say, the capacity within community to provide support, the care in community that supports vulnerable people's well-being in community. That Link had a really huge role to play in that, and had huge opportunities for itself as an organisation in execution of that purpose. So just over a year ago, I stood forward to kind of take a bit more of a direct hand in the organisation and move it forward down that path. So Link is really standing for well-being at home, keeping people safe, happy, healthy at their own home, but importantly, keeping them connected to services that are available to the rest of us who can get out and about ourselves, and keeping an equity of participation in community. So trying to stop people from being isolated behind their walls when their mobility, when their anxiety, when whatever it is preventing themselves from participation. A recent survey by Jared Manser, who's the Commissioner for Ageing Population in Victoria, 92% of people surveyed said that mobility was fundamental to their well-being. It was second only to secure housing. The most important thing to their well-being was having a roof over their head. The next most important was to get out.
And I have to attest to that, because as somebody who has as an aid for walking, and I struggle with walking and are reliant on public transport. For me to be able to get into my local community, accessing my health services and other spaces, it's so important. But I must admit, even with my kind of community knowledge, I had forgotten the link. Can you tell us, is it available in most spaces in Victoria County? Like, how does somebody, say, living in a particular suburb, find out if Link is available for them?
Yeah, so we're trying to join it all up to be universally available across all the Metro Melbourne growth corridors. There's a select regional locations, which is just a tiny bit at this stage, but will grow over time. We're trying to enact some significant sectoral change. The system at the moment is horribly fragmented. We're supported by all sorts of different funding mechanisms. And look, this is a change we've already kind of broken some barriers for. To go back a little bit, most not-for-profits, many not-for-profits, possibly most, are designed to respond to a particular piece of funding. So it means that the phone call with the end consumer is, hello, are you eligible for the funding we administer? No? Bye-bye. And it's up to the user to go from place to place to place, to find services that they don't know exist. According to rules, nobody can tell them. And it's awful. I've described it as being cruel. We are on a mission to try and simplify access to services, streamline access to services, and provide population scale infrastructure kind of availability for the basic stuff that supports well-being at home. And it's a very, very common, broad issue, and society should be better at serving it. So we're trying to integrate all of these different transport programs, well-being, cleaning, gardening, the basic stuff of keeping people healthy at home, keeping them independent in their own homes longer, and trying to do that in collaboration with local councils, with all sorts of different government programs and policy areas across all sorts of different departments at all sorts of different levels of government. It's massively complex, and we're trying to simplify that so that we can just deal with people and go, yes, we can help you. Now, sorry, who are you? What do you need? And work from there. We've made large advances down that path, but we've got a long way to go. You said before about equity. We're talking about transport equity. So for those of us who can get on and off public transport, fantastic service. Public transport is what, 87 to 92% public subsidy. You can get on and off as many times as you like, and your trips are subsidised. Good stuff. Productivity Commission had a look at it last year and said, oh, gee, it's very expensive, but the system wouldn't be viable without it. And it's got huge social and economic returns. Good work, keep going, job done, good stuff. Which is great for the people who can use public transport. But for the people who can't use public transport because they're in a growth corridor and it doesn't exist, or they've got physical, mental problems and they can't access it, they get zero subsidy. So the most vulnerable people are getting no support, and the people who are most able to look after themselves are getting a beautiful supported service. So we're trying to really push the notion of community transport, local transport, as being public transport for those people who cannot access public transport, and really see it in those terms and break down some of the barriers of access. Ultimately, it's not just about transport equity, although that's a nice term. It's actually about equity of access to services and community. It's real about social justice at that kind of level.
I think, yeah, that's something that I think people, you hear the word transport and you think, oh, it's a process of moving someone from A to B, but it's more than that when you unpack the impact of what it's doing. And for some of us who are frightened sometimes in using transport, and
Yep.
I always, some people who know me know I'm a big advocate for disrupting ableism in many spaces, and even the problems I face catching sometimes the ones that I fear the most are trams, because they don't wait for me, and I'm a bit unable, steady on my feet. And then the other thing that, to add to the complexity that I've experienced recently, and other people have said to me, is when we have disruptions in the existing transport system. And by that, I mean that there are works that are being carried out so that people with disabilities are normally used to going to stop 1 to stop 2, because like me, I calculate, okay, I can catch from point A to point B and I can walk this bit, but then I can catch this to get to my destination. But when you have a disruption in the system, and it's happened to me, I won't mention the service corridor, but there's a gap, and the bus does not stop where it normally does in the city. It stops near the market. I have to walk about 1 kilometre so I can get to a tram, and that's okay when my back and my strollers are a good day, but on a bad day, it's not feasible. And then I thought to myself, and when you mentioned about the link, I thought, wow, I didn't realize, and I wish there was a system in place where we can get services to kind of work together. So people who are vulnerable like myself, because I'm conscious, and I only bring myself to this conversation because for maybe other people listening who might feel that the same or don't have the voice, I'm a bigger person. I always feel conscious that maybe I'm taking up too much space in the tram, and I feel, oh, I shouldn't. But it's we go through these feelings of, oh my God, I don't want to create a problem. I've got my stick, and
older people are going, no, I'll be all right. No, I don't. No, don't do that for me. And it's sort of like, yes, we're going to do that for you. You need to get to see the doctor. You deserve to get to see your family. You should still be able to get to church or your community service. You should be able to go shopping. You should be able to lead a normal life. And we should have a society that has equity and support for those who are vulnerable. Now we're trying to use technology as best we can to really get to that point where, as a public transport service, it's serviced by an app. The app has registration of users who know their special needs. If you're not a special need person, you don't need to register because you'll get what you get. And you might need to walk the kilometre, and you're perfectly fine to do so. But if you're a registered user and it's clear that you are not a kilometre walker, then a service should be laid on to provide that. And again, it should be at population scale, as we talk about servicing people from active retirement through to palliative care, and everybody in between. We talk about just the transport or as much help as you need.
And is this something where you're looking at, in terms of your time in your governance, to look at if technology can assist communities to getting?
Absolutely. So look, technology is both in the delivery mechanism, as I said, being able to, find services relevant for me, understand when somebody books a service without having to ask them again and again and again and again what their needs are. Know your client, really having we call it kind of subclinical care, knowledge of the needs of our clients, so that we can give them a service that is appropriate and to service their specific needs. So we can use technology at that end. We can definitely use technology to do a better job of helping people find and access services. But again, in a community activation kind of mode. I mean, people say, "Oh, but older people can't use mobile phones." There are some who can't, and look, we've got a whole host of people out here and social workers speaking 25 different languages here to support people who can't. But there are plenty who can, and more than that, we're really interested in, as we say, activating families and carers in the care journey. So, Mum, you shouldn't be driving anymore. Let me sit. There's got to be a service out here who can help you. Let me serve it today. Oh, look, I've found it. No, stop saying you're not going to use it. I've booked you in. Look, I put my credit card in. I don't care. Just use it. There's going to be plenty of people who are capable of having that conversation. But there isn't. The system is still, and we're trying to fight against it, but it's a long journey. Still just very complex to use, hard to find the service. And just from a social point of view, the transaction cost involved in this means that the overall system is horribly ineffectual. The cost on clients trying to find the right service, the cost on providers answering the phone all day saying, "Sorry, I can't help you." It's a horribly ineffective service. So, our first goal is to make better use of the funding that's available in a more streamlined and more effective, low barrier service that is servicing the needs. There'll never be enough. I'm sure we'll knock on the door of government again to ask for more. But in the first instance, we could do a lot better just with the funding that's available in the system by breaking down some of those barriers, and that's what we're here to do.
And we mentioned earlier on that when we develop new suburbs and we plan, is your particular organisation involved? Like, are you contacted by people when they're building a new estate or that?
Working on it. Okay. Absolutely. Come right back to where we started in governance. So part of the governance of creation of a new suburb, in my mind, should be about measuring the equity of access to services and community transport equity, whatever it may be, the whole bunch of social outcome measures that, by the way, government's well down track in having developed. They're not applied. Where is the method of governance? And again, this is the basis of my PhD, so definitely on my soapbox in case you think I haven't been on it so far. How can they actually see what is the actual cost of developing this suburb, not just in its physical and built infrastructure, but in its usability, well-being, living infrastructure, in the soft infrastructure and the support infrastructure and the community that's required to keep people well and not leave them in isolation, disenfranchisement, and keeping them outside of community. And there are excellent technological solutions that are available to do this. Government often goes, there's not enough people out there to run a fixed bus route. Well, don't run a fixed bus route. Run a responsive service. It's what we do, as I said, public transport for people who can't access public transport. It should be a fundamental recognised cost of the delivery of infrastructure into these new and growth suburbs, so that we're not putting our most vulnerable people into scenarios where they have the least support. They should get at least as much support as the people in the leafy green suburbs in the east and everybody else. It really should be a question of equity. I think it's a question of governance, of being able to demonstrate at a government level what the equity of access to different types of services is across different suburbs, and whether the business case behind construction of development and construction, there you go, of new suburbs is delivering outcomes for real people.
So now I'm putting on my PhD hat, and I'm now asking you, what can councils do better? And I mean by that question, I'll clarify, by visibly, explicitly alerting people to a community or say a council area about your the services for Link community interest? So what can they do better? Because I feel that when I've gone, before I interviewed you, I sort of went on a few websites, a few different council websites, and I noticed, I would have thought the services that you provide should be paramount, should be like a big icon to say, do you need support to get you around our suburb and use our shops and use our businesses? But there's not. So maybe I'm answering a bit, but can you tell me, how do you feel councils could do more?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me answer that in two ways. One of them would be my PhD hat. The other one would be my Link hat. With the Link hat, absolutely, as you say, we believe that our relationship with councils is to partner on a joint mission to maximize the uptake, residents' uptake of available services. Council should see its role as saying, you know, we're not the ultimate provider of everything. There's other levels of government. There's a community out there. How can we advocate for our residents? How can we play a role in streamlining residents' access, in communicating to residents what is available to them? And Link providing these services that council doesn't pay for is something you'd think would be a shoe-in to say, you know, go here, call this number. They're going to help you. They'll make your life better. There's not enough of that. We're trying to change that. Many councils have been in a position, and this is starting to change, but slowly, where for one reason or another, and Victoria is out of step with much of the rest of the country, many councils have been involved in some aspects of federally funded service delivery. And it's put them into this mindset that other service providers are a competitor, which is insane. Many of these councils are starting to have made decisions to exit that service provision, which has put people in a cry, oh, they're exiting, they're abandoning their people, etc. And that is a narrative. I think it's the wrong narrative. I think the narrative is actually, this gives council an opportunity to move away from being a service provider and to come back to its core role, puts on his PhD hat, which is about their governance of the well-being of their community. Where is the voice from council that is saying, we've measured well-being for the people in our community and we have impacted equity, we have disadvantage in access to services in these critical areas for our residents. Why should our residents be missing out? They should be saying, what can we as a council do about it? Oh, Link, you can provide services here. Come on in. Let's communicate to our residents that this is available. If Link is not there or Link doesn't have funding from such and such a program to do whatever, they should be advocating for their residents. Why are our residents getting less than that suburb over there? So it actually sets a new role as governance of value for the council of saying, how can we advocate for our residents to maximize well-being for our people? Not as the provider of service, not as the funder of services, but as the advocate, because that is, I think, an inalienable role for councils that if they don't take up on, I think they're abrogating their responsibility, and I don't think there's anybody else who is there to stand up into that role. I think it is a vital piece of governance for them. I would love to see councils, and I mean the elected part of council here, taking that specific aspect of governance on board, because I think, like many other boards, and there are a particular constitution of board, when you look at what a council does and how they operate, they are in some ways a board. I think they spend more times on other things, and I think they should take some of the leading practice globally on how they can actually use governance as an effective tool for long-term value performance in their community. There's a challenge to them.
Mm.
But again, it'll come down to the basics. What should council be doing if it is not a service provider, or even if it is really taking a very active role in inviting, in streamlining, and supporting whatever it is that is going to make their residents' lives better.
Now, what about the people who are listening and who are saying, yeah, I love all these ideas. How can I support this? And I guess putting it on to be like a local champion, as I would call it. How can we get involved to support Link in our own spaces?
That's a really good question, one I was possibly unprepared for. We have increasingly through this year got more involved, something we've wanted to do for a while, but are finally doing it in some more of the grassroots movements. And there may well be some of your members and people listening to this who are involved. And I'm thinking, Better Buses for the West and there's a transport equity group out of Friends of the Earth, and there's people who are already involved in initiatives that have some kind of groundswell and momentum that are looking at community well-being. And look, we're happy to do what we can to help the momentum of those groups, and particularly to look at where equity of access to transport and mobility and services really aids their fundamental societal improvement goals. So there's some of that. Look, many of your members are going to be working in councils and government. Something that has frequently been a point of discussion between myself and some of my colleagues in some of the other peak bodies. I'm trying very hard not to name names, but some of the other peak bodies in the kind of social and community sector has been the observation that many areas of government at many levels, there are people there who have the personal aspiration to make a difference. There seems to be, we think, an opportunity in timing at the moment where just the wheels of change, some of the really big wheels of changes in NDIS, changes in aged care programs, changes in even federal government looking at a well-being based budget. There's kind of these big heavy wheels are moving, but I don't think the organizations and the departments themselves actually know what the answer should look like. They don't have enough, and transport has always been that we've been included in the NDIS planning, we've been included in the aged care planning, etc. But we're number 15, 17, 18 on the list, and they never get to us. And I agree, look at the list and the things ahead of them are more important, but they never get to us. There are people in the field, there are experts in the sector, there are practitioners such as us who have a real vision and a real practical capability of how this can be done both locally and systemically on a statewide basis, and what the overall infrastructure look like. It's been studied academically. I contributed to a paper through UTS for the Department of Transport, New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, WA, on the future of community transport, and looking at some of the systemic infrastructure pieces of making fully accessible transport, how that actually works in practice in a responsive transport mode. There are answers out there if you have the aspiration, if your organization has the aspiration. I put the challenge to you to say, focus in and help your organization focus on the value outcome, on the social outcome measure that you think you can actually move. Invite practitioners such as us in to talk to you about what can actually be done in practical terms. Try and keep it really practical. And let's see what we can do together. At the end of the day, this needs to be group activity. It's not something we can entirely change on our own. We do our best to bring different departments together, but ultimately we understand that there's stuff that we can only integrate at the coalface. But we can't. We need our sponsors and our partners and our friends to be aware of the journey that we're on, and be with us on that journey within the constraints that they have of their own organisation. And every organisation has its constraints and what it can and can't do, and what's in and out of its domain of control, and that's normal. But there is a real groundswell of goodwill out there, both in community and through the public sector. I think the political level knows it, but is actually looking for people to come together with answers and advocate for them. They find it easier to make policy decisions where there is a clear piece of momentum. The challenge is out there to say, look, there are some real impacts we can do here. We know we can do things better. There are answers. That's the one thing I want to get across. There are practical answers. That's what I've discussed with my colleagues. How do we get people in these departments to know that there are practical answers? They need to invite the people on the ground in to actually understand what they are. That's what I put out there. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Davis. I mean, it's wonderful what you and we'll put a link also to the website for people to look at and ideas that they might submit. And for those who are researching in the area of community transport or working in community spaces, I would strongly urge people to get in contact. If you have ideas, you want to cross-promote, cross-collaborate. I'm all about that. And I'm also now going to appeal to my first ever job. I worked for the first 8 years of my life in libraries. And to me, public libraries have a community obligation to really promote. And I know this from this is going about 30 years ago. I know when I worked in various public libraries, the Link Community Service was so important, vital to getting people into library spaces.
Absolutely.
And again, I think we need to maybe reinvigorate this, community spaces, spaces where we have food, giving food support to people now who are in accommodation crises, to really promote Link community transport. You know, some people just do not go and neglect their own health and well-being because they don't feel they can get out, or don't feel safe, or feel they can't afford it because they're on a pension. My urge to everybody today listening is to really, start, what can I do? I always say this, empowerment starts from self. And what can I do to make a change? And we've given you the tools today. Dr. Davis has said to us, go onto the website, have a browse, see what's around. If you've got ideas, and then talk to your council. Say, hey, excuse me, a lot of my friends can't get around. Could you maybe talk to Link, and maybe we could use cross promotion, or you could do an information session for your community about the services and how Link can get people. And the other word we haven't used, but I will throw it towards the end, that is safety. We're all about safety. We're all about making sure that everybody feels safe to go from their home to their business, to their service center or friends. And I think that this is the one thing that Link does give us, and that's a sense of safety. We know that when we get on a transport, the people operating know they will take time to allow us to get onto that bus. You're not going to be rushed. You're going to be supported, so to me, it's a win-win. So thank you so much, Dr. Danny Davis, for spending some time with us today.
Thanks for a fascinating conversation. It's been excellent.